Okay, so like I said, for just a few minutes, I'm going to talk about the graduate certificate. Can you all see the website?
Yes.
All right, perfect. So that's the website of the graduate certificate. My name is Edwige Simon, and I'm the faculty director of this small program out of the Division of Continuing Education at the University of Colorado Boulder. And it's basically a credential or a specialization. It's not a master's, it's just a certificate. And it's a 12 graduate credit program that are fully, and all the credits are online. All the courses are fully online. The admission requirements are a BA, and you have to have an affiliation with the world of language education, otherwise you're not going to enjoy our courses very much. And you can start at any time, you can take the courses in any order. Most students finish in 2 to 4 semesters. Some students just take courses here and there and end up finishing in, 4 or 5 semesters. And it's a program that is really for both novice and advanced user technology. So that's the program. To start taking courses, you basically go to the register tab, you fill out an application, you get a student ID number, and here you go, you can register for courses. This fall, we have 3 courses. A course on blended and online language instruction, a course for teachers who want to boost their proficiency. These 2 courses are closed for registration. The last fall course is still open for registration, and it's actually a required course to a certificate. So if you're interested, you can still jump in. There is room in the course. There are 10 to 17 students. And then on November 4th, ours will open for registration and have 3 courses. We're offering this course on teacher proficiency again. We have a course on emerging tools, and we have a course on digital games and language learning. A small change, if you looked at the certificate program before, we've condensed our courses. And so the emerging tools is now a 7-week course, and the gaming course is now a 7-week course. And the teacher proficiency, we haven't changed the credits, but we're working a little bit less time. You can email me, or you send me a message in the chat window. But I'm just going to now unshare my screen and introduce Debbie. Debbie, did I say that right?
McCorkle.
And Debbie is a French teacher at Unionto High School.
Good. It's a made-up word, so you did very well. It's a made-up word. It's a combined word, yeah. Union and Scioto, yeah.
I was gonna say, what does it stand for?
Yeah.
I met Debbie through the certificate program, and a while back we started talking about IPAs and AP testing, and I asked her to share some resources, and she very kindly said, I could do a webinar, and I said, yes, okay, when? So never make that offer, because I'm going to put you up on it.
As Edwige says, my name is Debbie McCorkle, and I teach school in Southern Ohio. And about 10 years ago, Ohio decided that it needed to have its teachers demonstrate that their students were showing growth in language proficiency. And so instead of waiting for them to tell us what to do, the state of Ohio, the Ohio Foreign Language Association and the Ohio Department of Education got together, and with advice from ACFL, helped us to understand this assessment called the Integrated Performance Assessment, which I'm going to call an IPA for the rest of this webinar. And it's not me. I didn't learn how to do these things myself. It's all thanks to my friend, let's see, things want to work here. There we go, sorry. It's all thanks to my friend, Martha Halemba, who is a retired Ohio teacher. But she did all of the background work for teachers in Ohio, learning exactly, what an integrated performance assessment could be, an IPA could be. And then she basically trained the trainers, and I was fortunate enough to be one of the people who she trained. And living in Southern Ohio, which is it's very rural, we needed to get the information out. So I went around to some venues and I shared information. So what you're going to see today is a combination of many things. To start with, it's what I learned a long time ago, and it's what I've learned since, because the IPA has become my way of assessing students. So tonight, I have some goals for us. The first goal is to just simply define what an IPA is. Maybe this is new to you. Maybe it'll be a review. Also, I'd like to share with you the steps in creating an IPA, what kind of thought process a person should have in order to create one. Also, we'll talk briefly, but it could be a complete webinar on its own, assessment, but how one should assess an IPA. And then lastly, but most importantly, are the lessons that I've learned over nearly 10 years of working with IPAs. So let's get started. First of all, well, what is an IPA? Well, here's the really long version. Where does this definition come from? I'm so fortunate in the state of Ohio to have an excellent world language department who puts together lots of information for us to have access to. And so this is the definition it's our working definition of an IPA in the state of Ohio. Of course, it's all backed by ACFL and the research that ACFL has done over the years. Anyway, what is an IPA? This is an opportunity for students to show what they can do with a language in a culturally authentic context. Now, I understand in the last 10 years that many of the words in that first line are loaded. What is culturally authentic? So we're not going to talk about that this evening, but that could be something that we could talk about in the future. Unlike the past, my past, because I've been teaching for more than 30 years, grammar and vocabulary don't drive the assessment. I don't walk in to my classroom and say to my students, hey, today we're going to work on object pronouns, like I used to, because I did. I tried to make it as exciting as I could, but we don't do that anymore. It's part of what we do. You can't complete an IPA without grammar. You can't complete an IPA without vocabulary. An IPA is also rubric scored, which is great. It's like the AP exam. Kids, you don't have to be perfect. If you don't have 10 boxes to complete, and if you miss 2, you get an 80%. What's that? We use rubrics. Also, the IPA, as the name suggests, it's an integrated performance assessment. That means that the tasks that we're asking the students to do are integrated logically across a theme. Oh, I see a typo. Across a theme and the 3 modes of communication. So that means that our tasks are interpretive, interpersonal, or presentational, and presentational. And most importantly, that each task builds upon the previous task. For example, I always start, I believe it's the law, that all of your IPAs need to start with an interpretive task, which could be a reading or a listening, because that gives us the information that we need in order to carry out the other 2 parts. But that information then leads to either an interpersonal writing or speaking task, and then that information will lead us to a presentational writing or speaking task. It's like a puzzle. Without one piece, the other one doesn't work. So that, in the nutshell, is what an integrated performance assessment is. Okay, all right. So at this time, I thought it might be an important piece of the evening for us to review the modes, and then also to look at what the modes are and what they aren't. So the 3 modes of communication, as were stated before, are interpretive, which means you're doing some sort of an interpretation. You could be listening to something, you could be reading something, you could be viewing something. The other mode is interpersonal, which means that there's a negotiation of meaning. Without one piece, the other piece can't happen. It could be that you're listening and then speaking to someone, or it could be that you're reading and then you're writing back to someone. For example, in that context, it would be perhaps in today's world, you're responding to an email. You're reading it and then you're writing back because the person's expecting for you to do that. Or maybe it's texting, because we know that is where our students are today. So they're reading it and they're answering right back. But there's two people having to negotiate some sort of meaning. Our last form of communication, mode of communication, is presentational. And this is when the kids get to create. But, and this could be in the form of speaking or writing or visually representing something. So that was just a quick review of the modes of communication. What I'd like to do now is to switch to, this was something that Martha Halemba gave to us many a year ago to help us kind of make that transition from traditional assessment to this IPA. What is interpretive communication and what is it not? So I have a slide for each of the modes of communication and what it is and what it isn't. Okay, first of all, interpretive communication is not translation. It is context driven. We want the kids to get the gist of what it is that they are reading or hearing. It's not word for word. They're not hunting for trivial details. They're trying to get the whole picture of the text. And they're able to do this because we have given them a focused task to work on. Interpretive communication is not glossed reading, which is all of that teaching all the new vocabulary first and then having them to read it. It's having them work with something in which they have familiar words that are in a new context, or maybe it's new words in a familiar context. Therefore, they can, from using their context clues, they can figure out what is trying to be communicated. Interpretive communication is also not just reading from the reader's perspective only. The students are looking at a text, listening to something, and they're getting the author's perspective and also a cultural. It is not just reading word for word. It is rephrasing, retelling, predicting, and using clues, context clues. So it's very much today how we teach our reading. Secondly, we have is and is not of interpersonal communication. Interpersonal communication is not one way, it's a two-way exchange, thus interpersonal. It's not memorized like we used to do our dialogues. Okay. It's spontaneous, which means anything can happen because the students are with the task, they are listening to each other, and who knows where the conversation might go. It's not only asking the questions, but it's helping each other. And I think this is one of the greatest things that I see with my students is in interpersonal communication today, in that because it is real and spontaneous, that they're looking at each other and they know when, for example, because it happened today in an activity we were doing, they saw their partner hit the wall. Like they didn't know what was going on, so they knew because we worked on strategies on how to help each other when you see that student hit the wall. So interpersonal communication is helping each other. It's not strict turn taking, it's following up, it's reacting, it's using those rejoinders, it's laughing, it's having fun. It's also not ignoring your partner, which I'm sure you've all seen that one, especially with the dialogue. They can just spout off their line and then you just watch their brain just kind of turn off because you see it in their face, or they're waiting for their partner to just, you know, blurt out whatever it is that he or she needs to say. In interpersonal, the students are indicating interest. There's body language, there's eye contact. Again, there's laughter, there's fun, there's communication. Interpersonal is not being overly concerned about being accurate. It's focusing on the message. The message is what drives everything in interpersonal communication. Interpersonal is also not giving up when you don't understand. It's whenever you don't understand or you can see that your partner doesn't understand, you ask for clarifications, you ask for maybe a repetition. What did you say? I didn't understand. All of those things. Interpersonal is two people having a conversation that they haven't memorized. Okay, so that is a quick kind of interpersonal communication is not and is. And we'll move now to presentational communication. So presentational communication is not negotiated. There's not two people. There may be two people, but one person is giving the information, not expecting anybody to ask a question, to make a comment, to make a rejoinder, anything. It's just one way. It's not random. Presentational communication will be practiced and rehearsed and polished. It also is not unplanned. It is planned. It needs to be planned. It needs to be organized. It is not speaking or writing in a vacuum, meaning you know who you're talking to. And this allows the listener, the assessor, the teacher, to understand if the student is aware of who he or she is speaking to. What register should I be using? What is the cultural context here? What things are fine to say and not fine to say? Do I know who it is that I'm talking to? It's not reliance on circumlocution. We want students to use whatever tools that you allow them to use to make them the best speaker that they can be or writer that they can be in this mode of communication. Lastly, it's not talking or writing only for the teacher. If your attendant audience is your peers, how do you maintain that an interest with your peers? How is it that you perhaps use emotion or humor, some sort of strategy to draw your audience in? And that takes a lot of effort. All of these things that presentational communication are lead up to you maintaining the attention of your listeners. So what I've just done is giving you just kind of a review, perhaps, or maybe for the first time, some definitions, descriptions of what the three modes of communication are. Now, you need to use, as we said, an IPA is based around the modes of communication. However, there are two styles of IPAs, and I wanted to take just a moment and talk to you about those. Our first style of IPA is the performance-based. We're going to take just a minute or two, and we're going to talk about the difference between performance and proficiency, because an IPA is one or the other. And I know today that the conversation between the difference is happening between these two kinds of IPAs exists. I will say that in my mind, they're clear. And I can say that they're clear because we made this clarification a long time ago here in Ohio, and I've stuck with it. I've made them very clear in my mind, and I'm able to do that. So what is the difference between a performance-based IPA and a proficiency-based IPA? I will show you that one in just a moment. So first of all, a performance-based IPA is a summative assessment that you will give to your students at the end of an instructional unit. And this is to determine whether or not whatever concepts that you were working on at that time were taught. Okay. So the tasks are based on the material from that unit. Now learners, they prepare to do these tasks because they've practiced these tasks throughout the course of the unit. And I'll talk about that in a little while, but I cannot emphasize the fact that you must rehearse the tasks with your students, or you will not have success giving an IPA as an assessment. Again, these tasks, as always, they are based on a central theme, and they go across the 3 modes of communication. Discrete grammar and vocabulary are not assessed. They're part of it. I can't say that enough, that grammar is part of the IPA, vocabulary is part of the IPA, or things can't happen. But we're not taking off points for not conjugating a verb every time. We're not taking off points for forgetting a vocabulary word. And you'll see, because we use our rubrics to do our scoring. So that is a performance-based IPA. So the second type of IPA is a proficiency-based IPA. So for me, proficiency-based IPA only happens whenever I need to demonstrate to the state of Ohio that my students have met a growth measure. Because this is a summative assessment that happens at the end of a period of time. Lots of time passes, and the kids have not rehearsed this at all. We just ask them to do something that they haven't thought about for a long time. For me, it's used as a post-assessment. Maybe in your school, you have to do semester exams or final exams. So lots of time has passed. So this kind of an IPA could be given to your students to demonstrate the growth over time. The tasks are spontaneous and not prepared ahead of time. Even though it's the 3 modes, you haven't practiced them. We're not getting ready for them. Okay? They are based on a central theme, right, across the 3 modes of communication, but it's a theme you haven't covered for a long time. It's not something that they're completely unfamiliar with. They just tanked that exam. So you need to think back, and when you're doing this type, and go, you know, what haven't we done for a while? What could I use to have them demonstrate to me what they've learned? They can draw on any language that they've required to accomplish the communicative tasks. Again, the language, though, what language they're using will also come from whatever task it is that you prepare for them. You'll be careful about what kind of a prompt and a context you create, and therefore they're going to kind of know what kind of language to use this in this task. And finally, there are, again, you don't assess grammar and vocabulary, okay? But of course they are part of it. Without it, we couldn't do the IPA. So those are the 2 types of IPAs, the performance and proficiency-based IPA. So what I'd like for us to do now is to switch modes, and I'd like for you to think about now, what do I need to do? What has to happen in my mind in order to create an IPA? There are some questions you have to ask yourself. And in answering these questions, for me, the answer to all this, it's easy to answer because I am the only French teacher in my school. If you are part of a department, you may need to have this conversation together because an IPA is a different kind of assessment than giving a unit test. So lots of conversation has to be had as you think through creating an IPA. I believe that the first thing you need to think about is, what are you assessing? Do you want this to be a performance or proficiency IPA? Do you want to assess something that you've just worked on? Or do you want this to be something long-term? Like, I want to assess this at the semester, so I change up the theme to be something that we haven't studied for a while. And then the next thing I need to think about is my targeted performance level. What does that mean? We haven't talked about that yet. Targeted performance level is the proficiency level. And you can loosely describe your levels as my level 1 students could be novice mid. My level 2 students, I would like for them to perform at a novice high. My level 3 students, an intermediate low. My level 4 students, an intermediate mid, maybe intermediate high. My level 4s, intermediate mid, intermediate high. My AP students, intermediate high, advanced low. You see that I had a little overlap there? A lot of it depends on when your students began their language study, but there are some loose proficiency levels that you can attach to level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. So you have to think about that. What level do I want them to achieve? And knowing that level, then we also have to ourselves know, if that's the level, we need to know what kind of language our students are able to produce at those levels. And that requires some training on your own. This is not a unit test that has fill in the blanks that are very simple to grade. What does a novice mid student look like? What does a novice high? What does an advanced low? You'll have some learning for yourself that you'll have to take on so that you can not only choose the right targeted performance level, but that you can later score it. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to assessment. Other things to think about as you're creating your IPA are, what is it that drives your units? What is it? What is it that makes you do what you do? Do you use can-do statements? Do you use the communicative ones? Do you use cultural can-dos? Are you just completely thematic? What is it that you use? So at this point, if you're using your can-do statements, ACFL, your own state can-do statements, your district can-do statements, what are they? What are those statements going to be? Write them down. What are they going to be? Because that can-do statement is going to drive what it is you do on your IPA, if that's what you do in your school. You need to create a context. In the past, we just did a theme. Pretty good, that worked. But you need to create a context. You need to give your students some world in which they can enter in order to complete these tasks, which, let's face it, these tasks are, they're artificial, but that's what we have. We have this schoolroom, this classroom, and we try to recreate things as best as we can, but still, we're here in this classroom, and so we have to come up with some sort of scenario. And then the next step that you take is that, for me, all integrated performance assessments start with an interpretive task. This interpretive task gives me the content that I need in order to do the next 2 tasks or 3 tasks, whatever it is you choose to do. So I have that information. Now for me, the majority of the time, my interpretive task is a reading task. And that's just very simply because creating a listening task that is from an authentic resource takes a lot of time and effort. I've got some of those, but it's easier to find the reading resource. After I have that resource and I've created the task, I'll show you some of those in a bit. And after I've got the interpretive task going, prepared, I then create an interpersonal task that's built on the information that the students have received from the interpretive task. And then the third thing I do is I create a presentational task that can build upon the interpersonal task. Now, in Ohio, we are told that all of these tasks can be, they're interchangeable. Doesn't matter if you do one or the other first. For me, the interpretive must go first. The other two can change up. But for me, this just all seems to be logical. And maybe when I show you a couple of my IPAs, you'll understand what it is that I mean. Okay, so this is all of the thinking. So, wow, this is so much more, so complex, but it is so rewarding. Yes, it's easier to perhaps, copy a unit exam from your textbook, but whenever I had a student a long time ago when I first started this, I had him in French 1, and then in French 2, I switched over to the IPA. He changed. He went from the student who was getting a CD because, he would miss blanks on his unit test. They couldn't fill in everything, couldn't remember all those little discrete things that I needed him to remember. But then when we got to the IPA and he could show me the things that he could do, while not always perfect, he completely changed and became a child who was B, C, and occasional A. So it's worth all of this effort that it takes in order to create an IPA. I think one day you'll have stories just like that if you decide to write yourself an IPA and assess your students this way. All right, so let's move on, okay? This next slide, it says, you've been doing this all along. I think that if you actually look at what you've been doing, and especially if you've been trying really hard to move away from using a unit test from a textbook, you've been doing an IPA. You just maybe haven't thought about all the pieces, like putting them all together. Let me give you a couple of examples. So maybe if you see them, you can think, oh, I have been doing this. And these again are from Martha Halemba. This was also part of our training a while ago. So for example, an IPA, it needs to be a thematic. It's across a theme. It's across the modes, okay? Martha's example is about shopping and clothes. We all do that. We've all had that unit in our textbook. We've been doing it for 30 years. Well, I bet you have your students go to websites. Well, right there's your interpretive. You've already probably got that resource. Okay? You just need to create a reading task, and I'll show you one in a bit. Interpersonal. I bet you already have your students talk about what perhaps they saw on sale at that store's website. Okay. The last one is the presentational. Write an email to mom about the cool stores in Madrid and what you found to buy online. I bet you're already doing all of those things. You just might not have thought about doing them all at the same time. Okay. Here's another example that I bet you've been doing. Schools. Have you been asking your students to read about grading systems and classes? That's an interpretive reading. You just need to create the task around the reading. Like, what is it? What are they doing as they read? Interpersonal. In this case, we have Martha's example is to Skype with a student from another country. Are you doing that? okay? And lastly is presentational. And Martha's example is to do a Venn diagram of comparisons and write a paragraph about which the student would prefer. The school system in which he or she lives, or the school system in which he or she has read about. So we've probably been doing all the pieces of an IPA for a really long time. We just haven't thought about putting them all together. And let's talk about that just for a second before we move on and look at the IPAs that I've created for myself. An IPA can be an assessment that you do all 3 or 4 of the assessment pieces at one time. So for example, at the end of a unit, you decide that you're going to do an IPA, and you do, you block off some time because it takes some time to do an IPA. You block off some time to do an interpretive, and the kids do their reading. What I do with the interpretive reading is I quickly grade their interpretive reading, and then the next day I give the students feedback. Because if they don't know that they've read well, then they can't really go on to the next 2 pieces of the IPA. And then the next day, that will be the 3rd day. This is day 3. So day 1 interpretive, day 2 feedback. And if you can do it quickly enough, you can go ahead and start your interpersonal. But let's say day 3 is the interpersonal task. And then day 4 is the presentational task. An IPA, if you're doing it all at one time, is very time consuming in the classroom. Okay? But you don't have to do that. There's no rule that says that that's the way you need to do it. You can do this you can do each piece, if it's 3 or 4 pieces, at any time during your learning sequence that you wish, whatever makes sense to you. You just need to remember that if time passes between each part, and because they are supposed to be integrated in some way, that before perhaps you move to the interpersonal or before you move to the presentational, that there's some sort of reminder, not a review, but a reminder of what they read, about what they talked about with their friend before they do each of the steps. So let's take a moment now and let's look at what I've done, because the 2 previous slides, this slide and the one before, are just some quick ideas for you to get an idea of what we probably are already doing in terms of IPA. This, however, I'm going to, hopefully this will work, we'll give it a check. I'm going to, I've linked here a couple of my IPAs, and I'm just going to show you them, and I'm going to walk you through my thought process just on the 2. So let's see if all goes well here. Yep, looks like it's coming. All right, so this is a novice one. Okay, so if this will click for me. All right, I'm going through my thought process. Okay, this would have been a performance IPA. It's novice high, maybe intermediate, depends on what kind of task you give them down in the interpersonal and the presentational. But then I have found my interpretive reading. Here's what it looks like. Whoops, well, it's not going to let me go there. Okay, we won't worry about that at the moment. Okay, anyway, it says to practice or not practice a sport. So there, I'm sorry, I apologize, I did not check that. But what I have here is with the interpretive reading, the students, I'll go back and check that for later, those people who would like to know exactly what this is, I'll get that fixed. Anyway, so what do my students do? I give them these tasks. First of all, they read the resource. I give them time with the resource, and then I ask them to recognize some keywords. Okay. I ask them to understand what this is a reading assessment. What is the author's purpose in this? And then this is supporting details. Here this is where they really dig in to understand what kind of information is in the story. What's this all about? And then after that, we have guessing meaning from context. These words here are very difficult for students. They're going to guess from using context clues what these 6 words mean, or 6 phrases mean. And then the last thing I ask students to do is just, what is the main idea? If they've done all of these things, if they've done all of these activities, A through E, they very easily can write me a main idea of this text. Okay, so that's the first thing they do, right? They get, this is obviously about pastime. Okay, here is our theme. Next, the students do an interpretive listening. I won't click on it because I haven't checked it. Anyway, I have here an interpretive listening. It's a young man, his name is Teiko, and he does a lot of talking. And I have the students, first of all, they listen and without looking at this, and then I give them this activity, and then they answer the questions. Because it is a listening activity, I kind of work on the AP premise that you get to hear everything twice. So they listen to it without the text in their hand, and then I let them have the text. And they try to answer. It's exactly like the reading exam, except that I leave out A, B, C, D. What have I left out? Keyword recognition, main idea. The guessing meaning from context is left out. All right, now, next thing is interpersonal speaking. So they've gained information from their reading. The students have gained information from their listening. And now we go to an interpersonal speaking. All righty, here's what I've asked them to do. After looking at the activities offered by the Paris City Hall and listening to the video by Teiko, discuss with your friends. What activities do you like to do? How often, how well, when do you do these activities? How much do you like the things? Are there no activities that, if there is nothing that interests you, talk about what you do like and how well or how often you do them. So, and make sure that you keep the conversation alive by asking each other's questions. So this is something that novice high students can do very easily. Intermediate students, mid can do, or low can do very easily. But they have to have had some information from the 2 previous pieces in order to have this conversation. Okay, so this is their interpersonal. All right, and then after that, I send them to, this would be day 1, 2, 3, 4, day 4. I ask them to do a presentational writing. And I say to them, here's their context. You notice that the site, and they know what site we're talking about because it's the Paris site, it has a blogs tab. After clicking on this tab, you find a bunch of posts by Parisians stating what they like and don't like to do on the weekend. You decide to post your own contribution. So I give them some parameters. That way, some things do happen in this. Because remember, it's presentational writing, so they need to think about, kind of do a little planning, and I help them do some planning here. Introduce yourself. Okay, what's your name, what's your age? Talk about 1 to 2 activities you and your friends like to do on the weekend and 1 to 2 activities you don't like to do on the weekend. Provide more details where relevant. Include ideas from your reading, listening, and conversation to liven up the writing. And then I give them a word count. So what we have here is my take on an IPA. And this is for novice, high, intermediate, low students, and they get lots of vocabulary from the reading, get some ideas. From the listening, they get vocabulary, they get some ideas that they can talk about, because lots of kids will bring in the idea about the moonwalk. I hear about that in this right here. Like, I don't like to moonwalk. I can't moonwalk. Ooh, I moonwalk really well. They talk about that. That's one of the things they kind of hang on to. And then, of course, those same things, they're going to come up in this presentational writing. So you can see that if you do an IPA together at the end of a unit, that the students can really, really, really incorporate the information from their interpretive activities. But it doesn't matter if you want to spread it out over your 9 weeks or your semester, whatever. Just you need to kind of make sure that they go back and be reminded of Teiko and the moonwalk or whatever. Okay. All right. So now,
Debbie?
Yes.
A couple questions. I think it's
sure. Absolutely.
Ask them. So first question, the two questions are connected. Do you give the directions in English or in the target language?
Okay. I give them in English, and it was part of our training a long time ago that I don't want them to get stuck on the directions. It's the task I want them to do. I mean, I don't really care about that. Now, that being said, as we get higher, like for example, a level 4, a level 5, if you're prepping your students for the AP exam, give them the directions in the language because they need that practice. So I give everything in English because I don't want that to be I don't want them to get hung up on that. And I've done that I've always done that. But the other side of that coin is that you might be hobbling them as you're getting them ready for the AP exam. Okay?
And the other question is, the interpersonal speaking is done in the target language, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yep, absolutely. Right.
The questions are
well, no. Okay, so on the interpersonal, the only thing that's in English are those directions that I give them. Does that answer the question? I'm not sure, because the students interpersonal for me is spontaneous, and it goes wherever it goes. I don't really give them much of a guidance. I just want to see where they can go with it. Does that answer?
Does that answer your question, Jennifer? I'll wait. She'll probably type something in a minute.
Okay, great. Sounds good. All right. Yes, no. But again, that question is always a controversy. I think you just have to decide what is important for you. Is it important that they just get that task completed, or they get stuck on the directions? Now, if you've trained them on direction, if you spend time going, this means this means that, they've got that vocabulary, then by all means have the directions in the language. Okay. All right. So sure.
So to clarify, Jennifer was asking whether the speaking prompts were in the target language or in English.
For me, the prompts are always in English.
Okay.
For me. Yeah.
Somebody said, and I think it's a good comment, somebody says, with the instructions in English, but the task in French, then the students must demonstrate their level of proficiency without being able to copy the instructions or the prompts.
Exactly. That's excellent. I'm going to steal that. So make sure I get that, because that's exactly because that's what they would do.
That you give up copyrights on that.
There you go. I love that.
Another question, do they record their interpersonal?
Yes, they do. They do.
What do you use?
I have, because we can, my students use voice memo on their iPhones, because pretty much everybody has an iPhone, and then they send it to my Gmail. I have a Gmail that is dedicated to these interpersonals. Okay. All right. So I'm looking at the time. Wow. Shall I go through this really quickly, so they can see this? This is an intermediate IPA. Okay. All right. So here we have an interpersonal, an interpretive reading. Alrighty. And so the reading's really, 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 really dense, as you see, really dense. But you know, I use it with my level 4. Here's where they get all of their info. Okay. By interacting with the reading. And then their interpersonal speaking, though, because this is the book of hours, right? It's the book of hours. And then I give them something that they can connect with, a time traveler, and they have a conversation. Okay, and then down here's a presentational. Oh, you are in the library. You have found this really cool book. You make this humongo text and you send it home. So here I have a seemingly dry interpretive reading about the book of hours, which to me I love. But then the other 2 parts of the IPA are something that the kids can connect to. And I think if you can do that, that's a really good thing to do. Okay, so watching the time. Okay, and all right, so anyhow, there's a couple of examples, and scoring, just things that you have to remember. I'll try to slow down here. Again, you have to remember, is it performance or proficiency that you're scoring, because that matters. And that also matters. That'll help you choose what kind of rubrics to use also. What is your performance level? That helps you choose your rubric, or excuse me, your knowing what it is that the students are able to do. Always, always, always share the rubric with your students. My students can talk the rubric. They know the vocabulary. They know what kind of language it is they're supposed to produce, and they are proud. I'm a novice whatever, I'm an intermediate whatever. They wear it like a badge. You may also need to calibrate with your department. That means you all get your rubrics, you get some samples, you sit around, and you all get on the same page as to what language looks like. Okay? Are you assigning a grade? You have to figure that out. What are you guys doing? Are you assigning grades? Are you allowed to just give a proficiency? Are you standards-based? What are you? You've got to think about all of that as you score your IPAs also. Where can your rubrics come from? Use ACFLs, use Ohio's, because you know what, we rock, or use your own. And here are some places where you can find some IPAs. It's at the Ohio Model Curriculum. That's a link right there. Also, I know, because I'm French, I only know where French ones are. But for those of you who know Lisa Shepard for Madam Shepard, she's got a ton of IPAs. So just research her. And then lastly, here are some lessons I've learned, and I wanted to really make sure that I can share this with you. Your students need to practice all of those. You can't just hand the kid an interpretive reading with the assessment and say, do it. You can't say, do an interpersonal. You have to practice. In fact, every day in your classroom can be an IPA. Start with the input, that's your interpretive. Then go to either some presentational or some interpersonal. If you practice that all of the time, when it comes to having to do that assessment at the end, either performance or proficiency, they're ready to go. I know somebody who didn't do that, and not only did her students cry, like literally, but she cried. So please practice with them, okay? Also, I can't say this enough. You have to understand what kind of language your students are producing. That means go get yourself trained. That might mean that you need to go do an OPI workshop for writing or for speaking. Learn. I had to learn. I had no idea. And so I'm not perfect, but I'm a work in progress, but now I think I have a pretty good handle about what my students can do. You heard me say, it takes a lot of time to administer. So do you want to do what I call a full-blown one, or do you want to do just pieces? I do pieces because it takes a lot of time. It also takes a lot of time to grade. In the beginning, every one of my unit tests was a full IPA. That means I was grading 3 different tests for every student every time I gave a unit test. All I did was grade papers. It broke me. So I've learned. You'll learn too. You'll figure it out. And the last thing is, let me tell you, this is the best thing ever, because students finally can show me what they know. It's not what they can't know, what they don't know. It's not that, you know, they can't fill in a blank or, you know, fill out a conjugation chart or whatever. They can really show what it is that they know with the language by doing this. All we have to do is be creative, think about it, put some effort. But you know what? Once you've got an IPA together, you've got it. And then you just go back and you tweak it. And you learn over time what works in your program and what doesn't. So anyway, thank you so much. Here I have some resources for you. The Ohio Department of Education. Here is our integrated performance, like some samples. On this Weebly site for the Ohio Foreign Language Association, there are rubrics, both proficiency and performance. Here's the actual performance descriptors if you want to like start training yourself on what language looks like. And then I give percentage grades. So when I use my rubrics, I can turn them into percentage grades. So there are some resources for you. And thank you. If you have any questions, there's my email. I would love to know what you are all going to do with the IPA. So please contact me. Questions, answers, how could I improve what I just told you? Because I'd appreciate to know that too. All right, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Debbie. Lots of thank yous in the chat room. I don't know if you can see the chat right now. So I'm going to try to remember. Somebody suggested Flipgrid for recording the interpersonal.
Okay. Yeah, Flipgrid would be great. And I know people who do that. Yep, absolutely.
And then, yes, lots of thank yous. And they're coming in, so I have to scroll back up. Thank you for your explanation. It made IPS much more clear for me, and I can see what I'm already doing and what I need to improve.
Good, okay.
Somebody shared madameshepherd.com. Yep. It's a website, right. Some French units.
Perfect.
And yeah, the rest is